Today's daf is daf ches, and by way of introduction, let's just review a very important point from daf zayin, and that is that when a person accepts upon himself nazirus, we differentiate between what's called a davar she'ein lo kitzva, something that has no end, like the sand, the grains of sand on the seashore, as opposed to a davar she'yesh lo kitzva, like where he says 100 days or 100 years, whatever it is, it has a kitzvah, it has an end. If it's a davar she'ein lo kitzvah, then we assume that he wants to accept many different nazirios, meaning smaller periods of nazirus, each of which is going to be shloshim yom. And that's going to be the first case in our Mishnah here on Daf Ches Amud Aleph. A man declares, Hareini Nazir Kisa'ar Roshi. Example number one is the hairs on my head. And we cannot count the hairs on the head or kafar ha'aretz or the grains of earth, or a third possibility, kechol hayam, the grains of sand on the seashore. In all these cases, harezen nazir olam. Now, there's a concept called Nazir Olam, which means that he accepts upon himself, in these cases of a davar she'ein lo kitzvah, many smaller pieces of Nazirus. And that'll take him throughout his entire life, but every 30 days, that's what the Mishnah says now, umegaleach achas l'shloshim yom. Every 30 days, he terminates his Nazirus and starts a new Nazirus. And how does he terminate his Nazirus? He completes it with Giluach, and then he brings the 3 animals as karbanos. So his intention here is to accept upon himself what we called Nazirios Nifrados, meaning separate Nazirios. How many separate Nazirios, each one of which is 30 days long, is equal to the number of hairs on his head or the number of grains of sand on the seashore. And each Nazirus of 30 days will follow the Nazirus that came before it. And this is called a davar she'ein lo kitzvah. And as we said before, and we quoted yesterday the Chazon Ish, if it's a davar she'ein lo kitzvah, it's a very difficult, almost impossible, intolerable kind of Nazirus. And therefore, we assume that what he really meant was to accept upon himself smaller Nazirios Nifrados, separate Nazirios, each of one, as we said, is 30 days. Now, this should not be confused and equated with what's called a Nazir Olam. It's similar to a Nazir Olam, because we had the kula of a Nazir Olam, right? The paradigm, if you recall, back on Daf Dalid of a Nazir Olam was Avshalom, and there we also allowed for Giluach, but then that's not equivalent to what we're saying here. Here the Giluach is at the termination of the Nazirus, and the Nazirus is 30 days times whatever number of saros he has on his head. In the case of Nazir Olam, that's a different kind of halacha. That's halacha in which he's allowed to take off that amount of hair which is necessary in order to be makil, in order to lighten the burden on his head. But it's not a total giluach. It's not the termination of a nazirus in the case of Nazir Olam. This case is like a Nazir Olam, because the davar she'ein lo kitzvah, we will define his Kabbalah's Nazirus as multiple smaller Nazirios. The minimum number of days for a Nazirus is 30 days. At the end of the 30 days, he will be megaleach kol sa'aro, his entire head, and fulfill the mitzvah of Giluach at the end of one's Nazirus, and then he starts a new Nazirus. Now, presumably, he will complete his Nazirus on day 31. What do I mean? His Nazirus actually is completed on day 30, but we wait until day 31 until he does his Giluach. Now, that day 31 will serve a double function. it will be on the one hand the day on which he will bring his karbanos and he will do his giluach, but on the other hand, it's the first day of his next period of Nazirus, of his second Nazirus. And for this, we don't have to say Ol Lakan Lakan, because that day, number 31, is after and beyond the Malos Nazirus of 30 days of his first Nazirus, and therefore could serve, according to everyone, as the beginning of his new Nazirus. Now, all this is a reflection of the Shitas Hatanakama. And now the Mishnah formulates the dissenting opinion of Rebbe. And Rebbe is going to build himself a shita based on whether he utilizes a Lashon Yachid or a Lashon Rabin. Let's understand Rebbe. Rebbe Omer, Ein ze megalech achas l'shloshim yom. We do not define his acceptance of Nazirus as multiple Nazirios, but rather it's one long Nazirus. And why is that? Because he uses the word Nazir. And the word Nazir in the singular is very significant according to Rebbe, because by utilizing the Lashon Yachid of Nazir, he means to accept upon himself one continuous Nazirus, not many different smaller Nazirus of each one of 30 days, but one Nazirus. Now, we've seen this already, according to everyone, even before Rebbe, in the case of a person who declares Haredi Nazir Mea Shana for 100 years. And there also, he's a Nazir during the entire course of his life, one long extended Nazirus. And what that means is that even if his hair becomes very heavy on his head, there is no permissibility, no license for Giluach whatsoever, because it's one long continuous Nazirus. Rebbe applies that even in the case of a Davar She'ein Lo Kitzvah, like Sa'arosho and Cholayam, if he uses the singular form of the word Nazir. V'ezu megalech achashloshim, according to Rebbe, in what circumstance would a Davar She'ein Lo Kitzvah break down into many Kabbalos of Nazirios? That's only if he utilizes the plural form, Ha'omer, and he declares Harei Alai Nazirus. And the word Nazirus, as opposed to Nazir, is multiple Nazirios. Kisar Roshi, Kafar Ha'aretz, Cholayam. He utilizes the Nazirus word, B'lashon Rabim, and here Rebbe concedes to the Chachamim that he's being makabel on himself many, multiple, smaller Nazirios, each one of 30 days. But if he doesn't utilize the Nazirus in plural, but rather his Kabbalah was Haredi Nazir in the singular, then according to Rebbe, he accepts upon himself only one single continuous Nazirus, which, as we said before, is going to take him till the day of his death. And that's like similar to the case of Nazir L'Mea Shana. The Mishnah continues and explains to us other different kinds of Lashonos of Kabbalah's Nazirus. Here's a very strange example. Hareni Nazir Melo Abayis O Melo Hakupa. It's as if he's saying that my Nazirus should be similar to what's ever inside the bayis or what's ever inside the kupa. Now, what he has in front of him might be a bayis rake or a kupa reka. We don't know exactly what's inside the bayis. And not only that, we don't know exactly what his intention was. And therefore, both can know so. This is the first time in Masechet Nazir that we encountered the possibility of investigating and interrogating him to ask him to clarify what he meant. We really don't know what he meant. So what do we ask him? We ask him, what was your intention when you said, Hareni Nazir Kimlo Abayis? Im Omar Achas Gedola Nazarti. I really meant to say that I want to accept upon myself one Nazirus, but I compared it to a bias that's mole. because I wanted to dramatize how difficult it is for me to commit myself to a 30-day Nazirus. So again, if he says achas gidola nazarti, so the achas means that I accepted upon myself one single Nazirus. The only reason I compared it to a malo bias, which is obviously made of many, many, many different elements and different parts, is because I wanted to dramatize how difficult it is, and this we saw already back on Daf Zayin, to accept upon myself Nazirus. But if, and in such a case, I raise a Nazir Shloshim Yom, and that's fine. However, if he gives us a different response, Im Omar Stam Nazarti. Now, what is the significance of the word Stam? And here, we're going to base ourselves on the sheet of Tosfos and the Meiri and other Rishonim. They say that the implication of Stam is that I hand over my Lashon Nazirus to the Chachamim. They will interpret to the best of their understanding what this Kabbalas Nazirus means and what is the definition of Kimalo Habayis. And in such a case, what are the Chachamim going to do? Roim es, either the bias or Hakupa. How do they view the bias? Ki'ilu hi malea chardal, as if this bias was full of such a number of different items, like chardal, where there are so many, almost endless numbers of seeds of chardal seeds. And therefore, we have again a case of a davar she'ein lo kitzva, because there's an endless number of mustard seeds. So therefore, v'nazir kol yamav, he is accepted upon himself in a davar she'ein lo kitzva, because this is the way the Chachamim will interpret it. Multiple nazirios, one after the other, that will take him throughout his whole life. It now becomes equal to the resh of the Mishnah of Haredi Nazir Kisar Roshi, etc., where he took a Nazirus on a davar she'ein lo kitzva, which means multiple Nazirios, each one made up of Shloshim Yom. And this is because he passed on to the Chachamim the reins and the dominion to define his Nazirus, his Kabbalas Nazirus. And these mustard seeds are very, very small, and they're almost endless in number, and therefore they're equal to the cases of Kechol Hayam that we discussed earlier. And it's a Kabbalas Nazirus on a davar she'ein lo kitzva, which the Chachamim define as multiple Nazirios, Kiminyan Garine Chardal, which will take him throughout his whole life. However, let's point out here, Rabbosai, that this statement of the Mishnah is against Rebbe. Because if you recall, Rebbe made the distinction between Nazir in the singular, where he means to have one continuous Nazirus, without the kula of being able to complete his Nazirus multiple times and shave his head. Rebbe says only if he said Nazirus, and the word Nazirus, according to Rebbe, that indicates multiple Kabbalas Nazirus. But here he said Hareni Nazir in the singular. And therefore, we're going to have to resurrect Rebbe Shita out of the resh of our Mishnah, where Rebbe disagreed with Hareni Nazir, and he said that even though Hareni Nazir and the davar she'ein lo kitzva, because he implemented the word Nazir in the singular, he meant one long Nazirus. And here too, in a case of Kimolei Abayis or Kimolei Akupa, and his response to the interrogation was that I am accepting whatever interpretation the Chacham will give it. The Chachamim, if they interpret it, which they will, as a Malei Chardal, it's Malei Chardal, which Garine Chardal are endless in number, then according to Rebbe, it's one continuous Nazirus. He will never get the opportunity to cut his hair. And that's because it's a davar she'ein lo kitzva, and Rebbe holds that even though it's a davar she'ein lo kitzva, where the Chacham say it's multiple Kabbalas Nazirios of 30 days each, Rebbe is of the opinion that since he utilized the singular Nazir. Therefore, it's one continuous Nazirus, like Rebbe's opinion in the Reisha of Haredi Nazir in the singular, Kisar Roshi. Here's another kind of Kabbalah's Nazirus. Haredi Nazir mikan ad makom ploni. And as we said yesterday, people used to take upon themselves Nazirus as a kind of protection min hashamayim, that as they're on the journey, they should be protected by Hashem. And therefore, omdim kama yomim mikan v'ad makom ploni. Let's evaluate how long it will take him to get from this point, his point of demarcation, to that point, which is his point of destination. And if, normally speaking, it would take pachos mishloshim yom, then the minimum amount of Nazirus is always shloshim yom. There's no such thing as Nazirus for less than shloshim yom, and therefore he's a Nazir for shloshim yom. If lav, but if the distance is so great that it will take him a longer time, much more than 30 days, in order to reach his destination, then the Mishnah paskins, Nazir kiminyan hayomim. He's going to be a Nazir for a Zman Aruch. Why? Why is it one singular Nazirus? And the days of Nazirus now will be multiplied by the number of days that it'll take him to arrive at his destination. And the answer is because this is called a davar sheyesh lo kitzvah. And in the case of a davar sheyesh lo kitzvah, that it has an end to it, it's one continuous Nazirus that's not to be broken down into its smaller parts. So how long will this Nazirus last? It might last 31 days. It might last for the rest of his life. Who knows how long it's going to last? How many days does it take him to get from one side of the globe to the other without getting on an airplane? Another case in the Mishnah. Hareni Nazir kiminyan yemos hachama. I want to be a Nazir like the number of days in a solar year. How many days are there in a solar year? 365. Is Mona Nazirus kiminyan yemos hachama. If he says kiminyan yemos halavana, then it's a whole different calculation, and we'll see what that is in just a minute. But as far as yemos hachama is concerned, since he wants minyan yemos hachama, he wants nizirios nifrados. In other words, when he adds the word minyan, even though we talk about a davar sheyesh lo kitzvah, we said that over and over again, a davar sheyesh lo kitzvah is one long continuous nazirus. Here we're going to break up his nazirus into smaller parts, and they're going to be 365 parts to his nazirus. Each one will be made up of 30 days. And the reason for that is because he added the word kiminyan. Had he not added the word kiminyan, then it would be equal to the Reisha of the Mishnah of Nazir Kisei Roshi, which means he has 30-day periods of Nazirus. Each Nazirus is a separate segment and a separate Nazirus. But now that he added the word kiminyan, he means to say that it's one long Nazirus, kiminyan yemos hachama, which is the last 365 days. If he did not say the word kiminyan, if he just said hareni nazir ki yemos hachama, then it would be a davar sheyesh lo kitzvah. And we said in a davar sheyesh lo kitzvah, it's one long nazirus. But here, he said kiminyan. And if he says kiminyan, then we're going to break it up into its smaller component parts, what we call naziros nifrados, despite the fact that it's a davar sheyesh lo kitzvah. It's not one long continuous nazirus, but the meaning of the extra word kiminyan is I want multiple nazirios. However, Omar Rabbi Yehuda says, I have a story to tell you. Masechet shahaya, there was a person who accepted upon himself a nazirus like that case that we had here, and that means he said kiminyan yemos hachama, and the Chachamim say that he has to multiply his nazirus of 30 days by 365 days. The kevan shehishlim, and when he completed his nazirus that the Rabbanu were mechayev him, namely a niyug nazirus of 365 days, then guess what happened? Mace, he died. It means he fulfilled his Nazirus and Hashem took him away. Hashem allowed him to complete his Nazirus. The Gemara is going to analyze this story in just a minute.
First, you're saying 365 days, not 365 Naziros?
No, 365 days, not 365 Naziros, right? Each day is part of his Naziros, and that's called Keminyan Yemos HaChama, Shlosh Meos Shishim V'Chamesh Naziros Keminyan Yomim Elu. And that's because he said the word Keminyan, meaning he wants that number to be part of his Nazir.
So that's not, you're not saying shot in accordance with Tosfos.
Yeah, I guess there are different pshatim in the Rishonim. We'll try to see if we can fit in all of that. But right now, I'm going to read to you. He says the following: that miyad maschil umona nazirus. In other words, he continues his nazirus. All right, we'll have to come back to this, Bobby, a little bit later because you're right. It really needs much more analysis based on Tosfos. But let's not lose the opportunity to really begin to understand this part of the Mishnah of Hareini Nazir Kimelo Bayis O Kimelo Akupa. And what did the Mishnah say in that case? It said Bod Kimoso. Correct? We check him out. Wait, just give me a minute. Sorry, I'm going to go. I want to just go back to Bobby's question for a minute. If he says Keminyan Yimosachama, then Mona Keminyan Yimosachama. Let me see. If it's a double sheish lo kitzvah, it's one long Nazirus. And here, he added the word Keminyan. 1 second, just because he added the word Keminyan, then it's going to be Nazirus. Keminyan. Just 1 second. I'm trying to make, there's a mathematical calculation here. Let's just see. If we're going to multiply it by 365, let's see, 365. 30 times. Can anybody do a quick mathematics?
30 years.
If you have 365, just 1 second, divide it by 30. So he says that that's 35. Does that make sense? Yeah, I think that works out. 35. 30. So let's see. If he's going to have, let's say, 30 days. So if he's going to have 30-day Nazirus times 30. How much is that? Five times is 150. And 3 is 90.
Actuary.
10.
Just 1 second. 5 times 30 is 150. And 3 times 30.
How many days, Scott? 30 times
is 180. Just 1 second. I just want to work this out.
I don't think why
It's
about.
180.
Why is it exactly?
And that is equal to.
The only thing is that
It doesn't. My math doesn't seem to work. But let's assume that it's 30 days. It's 35 years. So 35 years of Nazirius of 30 days, and that's because what he added the word minyan. So I don't remember what I said before. Maybe I said it the wrong way. So again, if he adds the word minyan, then it's not kiyamos hachama without the word minyan. And if he adds the word kinminyan, it means that he needs a Nazirus of 30 days times 365. So how much is that? How much is 30 days times 365? Is that 35 years? Does that make sense?
30 years.
Oh,
No, it's I think 11,950.
okay. He says it's 35 years, so I don't know exactly about the extra 5 years. Okay, let's move on. Rowan esakupa ki'ilu malei chardol v'nazir kol yom. So we said that if he gives it over to the Chachamim, that the Chacham will see this kupa as if it's full of chardol, and that makes it into a davar she'ein lo kitzva, because there's endless number of mustard seeds, and that means that he accepts upon himself multiple nazirios, and every 30 days he goes through his giluach and behema process. Gemara Samad. Why should we see the kupa as if it's full of mustard seeds? What compels the Chachamim to derive that conclusion? Maybe this kupa is full of larger vegetables, like pumpkins or kishuim. How do you say kishuim in English? I'm here in Israel too long.
Cucumbers.
No, not cucumbers. Come on, give me a break. Okay. All right.
Gourds.
No, not gourds.
Melons.
Not
Melons.
All right. Never mind. We'll call it kishuim for the time being, and then
Zucchini.
Zucchini. Okay, another word for zucchini. Okay,
Long green.
those green long things, Okay, not dark green, light green. Okay, all right. Anyway, so these kishuim and tluim are very large, and the kupa, this basket, will only hold a limited number of kishuim and tluim, which would mean that his nazirus is now a nazirus of davar sheyesh lo kitzva. And if it's a nazirus of yesh lo kitzva, then we said it's one long nazirus. V'tevi le takanta. And not only that, at some point, he will complete his nazirus. Let's say, for example, if there are less than 30 kishuim inside the kupa.
The cucumber.
Okay, leave
looked it up.
I need another word. Come on, guys.
Cucumber.
I asked you to leave out cucumber. I don't think you.
I looked it up.
I don't care what you looked it up. I'm telling you, there's a different word for kishuim. I'll show it to you. I'll take it out of my fridge and I'll show you kishuim. Rabbi Rhodes, can you tell me what kishuim are called in English? If you're looking in your translation, you're not going to help.
Zucchini. The kishui is a zucchini.
Okay, give me another word for zucchini.
When it goes bigger, it's called a marrow.
All right, forget it. Another Canadian. All right, anyway. So now, if he has less than 30 kishuim in the basket, then all he needs is a nazirus of 30 days. And if he has more than 30 kishuim, so he'll observe his nazirus to the extent in which they're corresponding to the number of kishuim. And to Evile Takanta, so after, let's say, 50 days or whatever it is, he'll finish his nazirus, and that's it. Whereas if you're comparing it to mustard seeds in the kupa, then it's endless. There's an endless number of mustard seeds. Omar Chizkiya, b'machlokes shnuya. This issue is really a machlokes between Rabbi Shimon and the Chachamim. And this has to do with a situation in which a person accepts upon himself a suffix nazirus, which will cause him to not be able to complete his nazirus for the rest of his life. He won't even be able to take off the hair that's heavy on his head. And our Mishnah here says Chizkiah reflects the sheet of Rabbi Shimon. Later we'll see Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. And what is Rabbi Shimon's shita? The Omar Adam Machnis es Atzmo L'Davar Shesfeiko Chamur Mivadai. What does that mean? If a person knew for sure that there were mustard seeds in the kupa, that would be a vadai, then it becomes a davar she'ein lo kitzva. And we said in davar she'ein lo kitzva, it's multiple nazirios, which he can complete every 30 days and shave his head. But the problem is that the rule of thumb is that a person cannot shave his head as a Nazir, even after his Naziris is complete, unless he could bring his karbanos. If he doesn't bring his karbanos, he cannot terminate his Naziris and shave his head. Now, again, if it was a kupa shel chardal, then his Naziris is made up of different parts, and he completes it every 30 days, and he can bring his karbanos, and therefore he could shave his head. But there's still a possibility, because of his suffix, that maybe what's inside the kupa is kishuim. And if it's kishuim, then, just one second. I'm going to read to you the translation here. If he's machnes atzmo levadai, so then what? So then every 30 days, it's a davar she'ein lo kitzva, so he'll complete his nazirus. Fine. Now he gets to the end of his 30-day period, and there's a possibility that what? The suffix is that maybe he accepted upon himself one extended nazirus. Why? Because it's a davar she'yesh lo kitzva. Because it's kishuim inside this kupa. Okay, now the suffix in kibul nazirus achas or harbe nazirios noig nazirus achas lachar kan shuv enu megaleach. Why? Mishum shein tiglachas v'lo korban shuv enu yochel v'korban shema kvar hish. Oh, now I got it. Sorry, I was missing the last 4 words of a very long paragraph. It could be possible that if they're kishuim in the kupa, then he may have already completed his nazirus. We don't know it's in the kupa because the contents of the kupa, as we'll soon see, got lost. So therefore, he's putting himself in a suffix situation in which he may have already completed his nazirus. And if he has already completed his nazirus on the side that there are only kishuim inside the kupa, then he doesn't bring a carbon at the end of the 30-day period. So let's say he'll bring his carbon once at the end of 30 days, because then mimanavshach, if it's many nazirios, because it's chardal, or it's one single nazirus because it's kishuim, then after the 30-day period, he could cut his hair and bring his karbanos. But what happens the next 30 days? When he gets to the next 30 days, he has to worry about the possibility that it's a chardal, but he might also have completed his nazirus based on the possibility of kishuim. And if he completed his nazirus, he can't bring karbanos, because this would be chulin lazara. So he's going to now have to enter into a suffix situation in which he could never terminate his nazirus for the rest of his life. Whereas had it been vadai, if it would have been vadai that there were chardal inside, then after every 30 days, he can complete his nazirus and bring his karbanos and then cut his hair. But now, after that first 30-day period, he will never, ever be able to complete his nazirus with karbanos, because maybe he already completed his nazirus based on what? On kishuim, and therefore the karbanos would be chulin lazara. The Sanya we learned in the Brisa, this is Rabbi Shimon, Hareini Nazir almanas shiahei bekri meyakur. He took upon himself a nazirus al tanai. There was an arema, there was a whole pile of grains, and he took upon himself a condition that I will be a Nazir if there's as many as mea kur, as 100 kur, and each kur is made up of 30 seah. So we multiply 30 seah by 100. That's a massive volume of tvua in the arema. For halach, now he went to check and see, does he have mea kur and the nazirus is chal? Does he not have mea kur and the nazirus is not chal? Mitzol shenignav, but he can't find out. Is Rabbi Shimon Oser? Rabbi Shimon says he's in a situation of safek nazirus lahachmir. By taking upon himself such a t'nai, he thrust himself into a situation where he's worse than if it would have been a vadai. He's in a suffix situation, which means that it could be that he's not a Nazir at all, because it could very well be possible that there's less than a mea kur in this arema shel tvua. And therefore, anytime he wants to bring a carbon to end his segments of 30 Nazirios, then he can't bring the carbon because maybe he's not a Nazir at all. The Tanai was never fulfilled, and he's bringing Chulun Lazara. He's going to be awesome at Tiglachas Liolam because he'll never have the option of being makar of his karbanos to be matir his gilua. Rabbi Yehuda matir shesofik nizuris lahakel. Rabbi Yehuda says a person never accepts upon himself a situation of sofek, which might lead him to such a chumrah that for the rest of his life he won't be able to engage in tiglachas. So therefore, his das was that if he won't be able to clarify and he'll end up in a suffix, then it's not a suffix at all. He doesn't want the Naziris to be chal. So therefore, in this machlokas between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda about whether or not a person would thrust himself into a suffix, or he doesn't want the Naziris at all to avoid the suffix, which is going to bring him such a chumrah for the rest of his life, our Mishnah reflects the shita of Rabbi Shimon. That's Chizkiya's argument. Why does it reflect the shita of Rabbi Shimon? Because we're not going to be how shall I say shtared? We're not going to be derailed by the fact that it could very well be that this kupa is malea kishuim, but rather we're going to say that let's imagine that the kupa might be full of chardal. And if it's full of chardal, then he accepts upon himself a nazirus made up of small parts, because chardal again is a davar shein lo kitzvah, of 30 days each for the rest of his life. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees with Chizkiya Amar afilu temer Rabbi Yehuda. I'm going to tell you that we can reconcile our Mishnah with Rabbi Yehuda, even though Rabbi Yehuda maintains suffix nazirus lahakel. Pasam, in the case where he took a nazirus al tanai, almanas that the Kri should have mea kur, there Rabbi Yehuda was making why? Because it's very possible that he's not going to be a nazir at all. Because within the context of a tanai, if the tanai does not become realized, there's no kima tanai, then lo noches leila nazirusa. Then there's no nazirus. So maybe the Kri does not have mea kur, in which case he never accepted upon himself nazir. So there's a suffix as to whether the nazirus is chal or not. And if there's a suffix as to whether the nazirus is chal, that's when Rabbi Yehuda says suffix nazirus lahakel. But Hoch in our Mishnah, when he says Hareini Nazir Mole Abayis O Kupa, the issue is not whether the Nazirus will be chal. It's absolutely definite and certain that the Nazirus will be chal. The question only is, how much is the Nazirus? Is it a Nazirus of Kishuim that corresponds to the number of Kishuim in the Kupa, or is it a Nazirus that corresponds to the number of mustard seeds of Chardol in the Kupa? Is Naches Le'Nazirusa. He's definitely accepting upon himself Nazirus. The only issue is he accepting Kamole Chardal or Kamole Kishuim? That's what we don't know. If it's Kamole Kishuim, then it's one long Nazirus that corresponds to the number of Kishuim. If it's Kamole Chardal, that's called the Davar Shein Lo Kitzvah, and therefore will have Nazirus for the rest of his life, terminating every Nazirus after 30 days. Right, so what do we have over here? Says the Gemara in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, "Ubemai disaluke mine." If he could be masalik himself in completely from a chiyuv nazirus, that's when Rabbi Yehuda would say safek nazirus lahakel, because he can be masalik himself from the nazirus if the tanai was not mekuya. So even though there's a safek whether he should be knowing nazirus, but nevertheless there's a possibility there won't be nazirus. But in this case, where there definitely would be nazirus, whether it's one continuous nazirus kikishuim or many multiple nazirus kechardel, there's no question that he is a nazir. In a case where he definitely accepted upon himself nazirus, then we're not going to say safek nazirus lahakil. There's almost like a chazaka in the nazirus. Now the Gemara says, I don't understand Rabbi Yochanan. My low. Why does Rabbi Yochanan insist that in a case of suffix we shouldn't be mekil, V'lichze lekupa kilu malek shuv v'diluim v'tehevi letakanta. The Gemara says the following. After all, according to your logic, Rabbi Yochanan, that if there's a suffix when the Nazirus gets off the ground at all, then we could be making a suffix. Here, in the case of Hareni Nazir Kikupa, right, Kikupa Malaya, etc., we have a situation in which there won't be Nazirus at all. How so? The Salkin Taitach, Nazirus Huda Kibul Aluya. He accepted upon himself on the side that we're talking about Molech Chardol, many different multiple Nazirios. So when he finishes his first 30 days of Nazirus, now we have a suffix as to whether or not he accepted upon himself another Nazirus. So at that moment in time, if you isolate that moment at the end of 30 days, then it could very well be that he's not a Nazir anymore. Because maybe it's Kikupa Mole Kishuim. And if it's Kikupa Mole Kishuim, he's already completed his Nazirus. So you'll tell me, but there's definitely a Cheskas Nazirus on the side that is Chardol. Yeah, that Cheskas Nazirus and Vade Nazirus on the side that is a Chardol only continues until the end of the 30 days. But after the 30 days, he's going to start a brand new Nazirus. And if he starts a brand new Nazirus, then we should apply the principle of Safik Nazirus Lahakel, because Rabbi Yochanan holds that the entire premise of Rebbe in adding Nazirios is based on the fact that he's a Vadei Nazir. Yeah, he's a Vadei Nazir up until the 30th day, but after the 30th day goes by and he's now about to enter into a new Nazirus, well, at this point, he's in a Safik whether or not he's a Nazir. And here we turn to Daf Ches Amid Beis. The Rebbe Yehuda, take out the Dalet, the Tosafot says. Rebbe Yehuda Savar Rebbe. The Gemara says that according to Rabbi Yochanan, Rebbe Yehuda is going to hold like Rebbe. What's Rebbe Shita? You remember that Rebbe differentiated between Nazir v'Loshen Yachid or Nazir v'Loshen Rabin. Tisnan, what was Rebbe Shita? And now the Gemara is insisting that according to Rebbe Yochanan, Rebbe Yehuda accepted the Shita Rebbe. Tisnan, we learned in that Mishnah, Rebbe Omer, Ein Zeh Megaleach, in the case of Areni Nazir Kisar Roshi, he's not going to be Megaleach, Achas L'Shloshim Yom. And why not? Why isn't it a multiple Nazirios? And the answer is because, and again, we're talking about a Davar Shein Lo Kitzvah. And the answer is because he used the word Nazir in Lashon Yachid. And Nazir Lashon Yachid means he accepted upon himself one long continuous Nazirus. And therefore he cannot be Megaleach every 30 days. When does Rebbe agree to the Chacham? That's only Omer Alai Niziros. Niziros is the plural of Nazir. Kisar Roshi, Kafar Aretz, Ukechol Hayam. In such a case, Niziros is Lashon Rabin, and he accepts upon himself many different Nazirios, multiple Nazirios of 30 days each, because it's a Davar Shein Lo Kitzvah. And if, according to Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yehuda accepts Rebbe, then when a person says Hareni Nazir Kimole Akupa, then it means that since he uses the word Nazir in the singular, he accepts upon himself one continuous Nazirus. And therefore, if it's a suffix, then perhaps what he meant to say was Kimoli Chardol, and therefore we have to be machmir on him, and he's going to be Noeg Nazirus for the rest of his life. And the reason for that is because Rabbi Yochanan's answer and his interpretation of the Mishnah working out according to Rabbi Yehuda, that suffix Nazirus Lahakel is because here it's a case where he used the word Nazir, and if he used the word Nazir, he wants one continuous Nazirus. And we'd have to be machmir him for Kol Yamav. This is not the case of Rabbi Yehuda. So Gemara says, wait a minute. You're assuming Rabbi Yochanan that Rabbi Yehuda accepts Rebbe and differentiates between Areni Nazir, Kisar, and Rosh, where he wants one long Nazirus against the Tanakama? For Tanan, it says in our Mishnah, Areni Nazir, Kimini Yimosachama, and he accepted upon himself 365 days of Nazirus. That means every Nazirus that he accepted upon himself will be for 365 days, which we said we're going to multiply by 35. Is Amar Rabbi Yehuda Maisa Hoya. He tells us a story. And a person declared Areni Nazir Kimini Mosachama, and the Chachamim said that he has to do Nazirius of 30 days times 365. Is Kevan Shehishlim Mace. And Rabbi Yehuda tells us the story that after he completed his Nazirus, he died. If we're going to say that according to Rabbi Yehuda, when a person says Hareini Nazir, and he uses the singular, then Naziros Kamakabla, I could understand if, according to Rabbi Yehuda, even though he used the singular, he means Nazirios, so he's going to have 30 Nazirios of 365 days. I'm sorry, he's going to have 365 Nazirios of 30 days each. Is then Hainu Taima. Now I understand what it means. Kavan de Hishlim. He was mashlim his Nazirios. Why? Because he accepted upon himself 365 Nazirios, and he fulfilled that after 35 years, and Mace, and then he died. But if you're going to insist that Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rebbe, that when you use the singular Nazir, and he said already Nazir, it means that what? That he accepts upon himself one single Nazirus, is mi'avi ashlama kal. V'chi shayach bei loshen ashlama, hare loshen zeh sheyachas rak b'gibu Nazirios, v'lo b'Nazirus achas. What does that mean? Let me just see if he adds anything here. All right. So this is something that Tosas says. Tosas says that if he wants Chad and Nazirus of Kiminyan Yemos HaChama, then that's not called a Hashlama. That's not called a Hashlama, but rather that's called one Nazirus. The word Hashlama is a word that can only be appropriate for multiple Nazirios. Hashlama means he completes one Nazirus after another. But if it's one long Nazirus, then we don't use the word Hashlama. That's what Tosas says. The Ode, furthermore, I'm going to give you a further proof that Rabbi Yehuda never accepted the distinction of Rebbe between Nazir, B'Lashon Yochin, and Nazirus. Me, Savalaka Rebbe, Vatanya, we have in a Brisa, Rabbi Yehuda, Omer, a person took a neder, Hareini Nazir, Minyan, Hilkete, Kayitz. This is also a Davar Shein Lo Kitzvah. We're talking about piles and piles of figs that are being dried in the sun, or Minyan Shibale Shemitah. These are the shibolim that are left in the field after the Shemitah. And according to Tosas, these are the routes or the routes in which he goes through the field. And there are multiple numbers. Is then Mone Nazirus, meaning it's a Davar Shein Lo Kitzvah, and it breaks down into smaller pieces and segments of Nazirus of 30 days each. Kiminyan Hilkete Kayitz, Ukiminyan Shibale Shemitah, that have no number to it, no end to it. They're infinite. And all of his days, he will count 30 days, and he will end his Nazirus and start again. So we see here that even though his language was Hareini Nazir in the singular, nevertheless, Rabbi Yehuda says that he accepted upon himself not one continuous Nazirus, but multiple Nazirius. And that's against Rebbe, because Rebbe would say in the case of Nazir in the singular, he accepted upon himself one continuous Nazirus. And again, the nafkamina is whether he can shave his hair after 30 days. The Gemara rejects this. Minyan Shiny. What was the case that Rabbi Yehuda formulated in the Brisa? It was a case where he added the word minyan. And once he added the word minyan, that changes the whole din. And minyan means, again, Naziros Nifrados. These are the numbers of different Nazirios, and it's Kiminyan Hilkete Kayitz, etc., etc. If he would have said Hareini Nazir and left out the word minyan, just Hareini Nazir Hilkete Kayitz, or Kishvile Shmita, then if he doesn't add the word minyan, then since Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rebbe, and the singular of Nazir means one long Nazirus, therefore he would observe one long Nazirus. But only here where he added the word minyan, that indicates that he wants Nazirus Nifrados. The Gemara says, according to Rebbe, Mi Shani Leila Rebbe minyan, now that you're equating, according to Rabbi Yochanan, the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda with Rebbe, and now you're saying that Rabbi Yehuda is based on the word minyan, therefore it must be an ipso facto that Rebbe would agree that if he says minyan, even though he used the singular of Nazir, he means to accept upon himself multiple Nazirios. But Tanya, we learned in a Brisa, Hareini Nazir. So again, he uses the singular, but he adds Kiminyan Yemosachama. Mona Nazirus Kiminyan Yemosachama. In other words, he needs 365 Nazirios of 30 days. Why? Because he said minyan. Fine. So far, so good. That's the Tanakama. Kimei Alafon, if he says, I want Nazirus Kiminyan Bimeacham Alafona. Again, it's Machlokas here, Rishonim, whether you add the word minyan here, but let's say we add the word minyan. Kiminyan Yimeachama. Mona Kimei Alafona, which is 354 days. So he needs 354 Nazirios that are made up each of 30 days. Rabbi Omer, Rabbi disagrees. No. He used the word Nazir in the singular. And if he used the word Nazir in the singular, we don't break it up into 30-day separate Nazirios, multiple Nazirios, but rather it's one long Nazirus. Rabbi Omer, Achi Omer, Naziros, all like Yimos Hachama. So you see that even though he used the word minyan, nevertheless, Rebbe still makes his distinction, and he says it's one long Nazirus if he only used the word Nazir in singular. Only when he used the word Nazirus in plural, then he accepts upon himself 365 Nazirios, each made up of 30 days. So Gemara answers that no, even though Rebbe holds that if a person says Hareini Nazir, even though he had the word minyan, he means one Nazirus Harucha. Nevertheless, Rabbi Yehuda Savar L'Kavasi B'chada Upalagalei B'chada. Rabbi Yehuda accepts the shita of Rabbi Savar L'Kavasi B'chada when he says Hareini Nazir B'Loshen Yachid Kibul Alei. He accepted that shita of Nazirus Achas Kibul Alei, Nazir in the singular, but Palagalei B'chada. He didn't accept the question of adding the word minyan to Ilu Rabbi Yehuda Shani Leimona. Rabbi Yehuda says that if he added the word minyan, even though he used the singular, he means to accept multiple Nazirios. The Rebbe Lo Shani Leimona. Rebbe does not make the distinction. If he adds the word minyan, it all is contingent on Nazir versus Nazirus. And according to my clock, we have 3 more minutes. Tana Rabbana. Hareini Nazir Kol Yemei Chayai. Hareini Nazir Olam. Hareza Nazir Olam. In other words, since he said that he's accepting upon himself a Nazirus of Ein Lo Kitzvah, Kol Yemei Chayai, he's a Nazir Olam. What's a Nazir Olam? Not a Nazir Olam like Avshalom, but rather a Nazir Olam of multiple Nazirios of 30 days in the Dovish Ein Lo Kitzvah, and when his hair gets heavy, he'll cut it every 30 days. Afilu Me'ah Shana, Afilu Elf Shana, Ein Ze Nazir Olam, and a Nazir Le'olam, right? A Nazir Olam would be allowed to cut his hair every 30 days. But here he's a Nazir Le'olam. Why? Because he says, Hareini Nazir Kol Yemei Chayai, that's a Nazir Le'olam, and there's no heter to cut his hair. Okay, now, again, this last piece of Gemara we can come back to later on, but I just want to finish the daf with Tana Rabbanan, Hareini Nazir V'achas. He says V'achas, and the first Kabbalah was a 30-day period of Nazirus, and then V'achas means another Kabbalah of Nazirus, so he needs another 30 days. V'od, and if he adds the word Hareini Nazir Achas V'achas V'od, Mona Shalosh, and if he says Hareini Nazir V'achas V'od, then he has 3 Naziros, and if he says Hareini Nazir V'achas V'od and V'shuv, Mona Arba. So Gemara says Pshita. Obviously, every word that he's adding is another Kabbalah's Nazirus. Ma'odetem, I would have said that V'shov Kikulu, it means that he wants V'shuv to be Makabal like the original Kabbalah's Nazirus of Hareini Nazir V'achas, and therefore, what does it mean? That K'moshe calls Nazirus Shekibel Avad Atom Aviris Hareini Nazir V'achas V'od. So the shuv is like doubling over the situation that he started with Hareini Nazir V'achas V'od, and that means he needs another 3 Nazirios, all totaling 6. Kamashman Delo, the Vice tells you not. Tana Rabbanan, What about Nazirus in another language, in a foreign language? Hareini Nazir Sumchas Omer Hain. If he says Hareini Nazir Hain, he means achas, because in Greek, the word Hain means one. Digun is two. So therefore, Hareini Nazir Digun, two Nazirios. Trigon, tree, dry, that's shalosh. Tatragon is arba. Pontigon is chamesh. So these are all words, and the Bryce is telling me that you could be makabel nazirus in any language. And finally, Tanur Rabbanan, where do we find another halacha in which we define the halacha by another language? Tanur Rabbanan, the Bryce uses another language to describe a ptur from Tumas Nigei Batim. In Tumas Nigei Batim, we require a bias of 4 corners, and that's based on kiros, as we'll soon see. Bias ogol, if he has a round house, odigun, or a bias that's open on one side, so he only has 2 corners, or trigon, he has a bias that has only 3 corners, or pontigon, a bias that has 5 corners. Eino metami b'negoim, but targogon, if it's tatu agon, which means in Greek 4 corners, metami b'negoim, my timer. Why is it that a bias that has 4 zavios, 4 90-degree corners is metami negoim, but if it has less or more, it's not metami negoim? And the answer is because in the parsha Vayikra Yudalid of a rav v'hine pasa nega b'kiros habayis, the word b'kiros appears twice. Kiros means 2, and afterwards, ulamala, in the original pasuk, it says v'ras hanega v'hine hanega b'kiros habayis. Again, the word kiros, 2 and 2, kir is kiros, times 2, arekan arba, which means 4 kiros. Then it's in the parsha of Nigei Batim, because 4 kiros means 4 zavios, 4 corners. Last Gemara, Hadron Aleph and Kolkinu, reminds me of the Gemara about tzitzis. If you have a beged of 3 or a beged of 5, whether you're chayv in tzitzis, you're not chayv for a beged of 3. My focus is you're chayv for a beged of 5. So the only thing I have to come back to here, for anyone who can stay another minute or so, is Tanur Rabbanan. The brisa right before the sugya of Nazir v'yachas, Nazir v'shtayim, etc., etc. Tanur Rabbanan, Hareini Nazir kol yemei chayai. Oh, Hareini Nazir olam, Hareini Nazir olam, which means that he's a Nazir olam, and that means that it's a davar shein lo kitzvah, which we said is like the Nazirus of Shalom, and therefore he accepts upon himself multiple Nazirios, and every 30 days, if his hair gets very heavy, he could take a haircut and bring his karbonos. Oh, but if he says Hareini Nazir, afilu me'ashana, if he takes upon himself a Nazirus with a davar sheish lo kitzvah, even if he says 100 years and he's not going to live another 100 years, or afilu elef shanim 1,000 years, ein ze Nazir olam. We are not going to allow him to cut his hair when it gets heavy. Why? Because el Nazir le olam, it's not a Nazir olam like Avshalom, because of a davar she'ein lo kitzvah, but here it's a davar she'yesh lo kitzvah, and if it's a davar she'yesh lo kitzvah, as we said over and over again, it's one continuous long nazirus without any permission to be megalech at all, and he's knowing his nazirus continuously for his entire life. As we said back on Daf Zayin, Makabel Nazirus b'davar she'yesh lo kitzvah, kavanasol Nazirus achas arucha kiminyan zeh. And I'll add one last thing as we end, when he says Hareini Nazir the achas, or the od, or the shuv, where's the lashon Nazirus for the second Kabbalah, the third Kabbalah, and the fourth Kabbalah? Says the Karen Ora, this is all based on the halacha of Yodayim Nazirus ki Nazirus, that Nazirus is chal, Yodayim, and therefore an incomplete lashon of Nazirus will complete his lashon, and the Nazirus is chal. So here we finish the first perek, and B'li Neder, tomorrow we begin Daf Tes, Hareini Nazir min Agrogros, etc., etc. So I'll wish you all a great day, and thank
May I
you.
ask a question before you
Please.
leave? I have 5 minutes still. How come when we're dealing with Chargel, we don't count by number, we count by weight? When we're buying and selling, it depends on what you're selling, whether you count the individual pieces or you go by weight. Chardal, I'm sure you don't sell it like that. Why don't we
No.
say it's a-
Again, in sale, you could talk about different possibilities. How you sell something, is it by numbers or by weight? Eggs you sell per this and that. But here we're talking about Nazirus. In Nazirus, a person accepts himself a certain number of Nazirios or a certain number of days within one long Nazirus. So here we're not going to introduce weight when he compares himself to a bias that's Molei Chardal. What he's talking about is how long is his Nazirus? His Kabbalah Nazirus equal to the number of seeds of Chardal, the number of Kishuim.
Well, my question is, we're trying to see what's in his mind. And in his mind, he may say, well, I buy and sell Chardal by weight. So I have in my mind that
I don't think that's relevant.
Again,
when you talk about selling, that's a whole different situation.
I know,
Selling,
I'm just saying that.
People sell by weight, but when you're talking about Nazirus is not measured by weight. Nazirus is measured by numbers. Again, it could be two different kinds of numbers. It could be numbers of individual Nazirios or numbers of Kabbalah's Nazirus. But at the end of the day, it's got to reflect the number.
Okay.
So by tomorrow, it's Hashem, I'll remind myself, if I don't, I'll ask my wife, what are Kishuim in English? They're not cute. Okay, then?
Okay.
All
Okay.
right, have a great
One
day.
more thing. Is Nazir's Chal today?
Yes, the Ravid says that you shouldn't take upon yourself Nazirs because we're all Tmeim and it'll only be.
You can't bring a
Nazirus for
korban.
Tumah. The Rambam doesn't
Can't
make
get
that
out of it.
distinction. The Rambam says there's Nazirs today. I told you, I think I mentioned to you that I visited a Nazir. He had very, very long hair, so I assume he was a Nazir Olam. His name was Cohen, actually. He was married to Rav Kook, the chief rabbi of Palestine's daughter. And when he sat Shiva, I said, I got to see this Nazir. I was a youngster at the time. And I still have a picture in my mind of what the Nazir looked like.
Okay,
Okay, then?
So Marvin,
Yeah.
there's still hope for you. Become a Nazir.
Yeah, why not? Why not? I'm always traveling from Efrat to Yerushalayim. And
My wife says this is long enough.
All
Okay,
the
have a
best.
good